This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for all of your website building needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and as some of you might remember, I recently made a video going over some of the most currently reliable ways to identify AI art, discussing its most frequent red flags and weaknesses to watch out for when viewing art that you suspect of being potentially AI generated. I made that video with what I now see are slightly naive intentions and expectations, operating under the assumption that that information would be used the way that I use it, to help people determine whether or not an image they're looking at is human-made, so that they can be informed when deciding whether or not they want to purchase it, share it, save it, use it for reference, or support the artist in question. I don't personally want to do any of those things if I think the image in question might be generated by AI, which is why I made that video, because those are the things I look for to avoid doing so, and I wanted them to be helpful to others with the same concerns and intentions. Unfortunately, as I said, that approach was naive and probably a little arrogant, because I assumed everyone hearing that advice on how to spot AI art would use it the same way I did, just to make judgments for themselves as to the human-made authenticity of art to use to inform their decisions on whether or not to engage with it in any capacity. I failed to realize that that's not really the direction the community is going in. Instead, it seems that the fear surrounding AI-generated images has prompted the sentiment to shift towards a much more volatile and action-oriented approach. Instead of just trying to judge for themselves whether an image is human-made or not, they're throwing out baseless accusations at any artist with a style even vaguely reminiscent of AI that they're using it to create it, and that it's not really their own work. I understand the suspicion. It's become the new normal to view every image through a critical lens, wondering whether any art we see online is really made by a human or just generated by an algorithm. That suspicion and the constant stress of experiencing it is exactly why I made that first video, to alleviate it for myself and others by providing tips on how to determine whether it's warranted or not, in hopes that in most cases it would actually result in people realizing that the art they're suspicious of actually isn't likely to be AI generated more often than not. And I do think I made that intention clear. I explained at the beginning that while a lot of the tells indicating AI image generation could indicate that it was used, a lot of them are also perfectly innocent mistakes that a human artist could make and should not be taken in and of themselves as unilateral proof that they didn't make those mistakes themselves. I place the majority of those how to identify AI art tips in the circumstantial category, clarifying that without undeniable proof, they can't on their own be considered to be anything more damning than supporting evidence. They're reasons to be suspicious and look closer, yes, but not reasons to draw conclusions. Unfortunately, drawing conclusions with minimal evidence has become the new normal in the art community now, and regardless of what my intentions were with that video, I worry that I contributed to that. I don't want people using those tips to accuse real human artists of using AI when they didn't, and the accuser can't even vaguely prove that they did. But that's what's happening more and more with every passing day. It seems like it's impossible to even share your art online anymore without someone saying, "This tiny mistake you made is proof that this is AI generated, you liar," or "You improved way too quickly, you must be using AI," or "I can tell from the style alone that this is AI." It doesn't seem like evidence even needs to be provided beyond those flimsy initial claims for these accusations to be made and taken seriously either, something that's as infuriating as it is harmful. Artists everywhere are sincerely afraid to participate in art-focused online spaces for fear of facing those claims themselves, and as technology continues to develop at an unprecedented rate, the ways with which to dispute them and prove that AI wasn't used are diminishing. All of this is to say that while I'm leaving that video on how to spot AI art up, because I do think it's important to be able to do so with at least some degree of effectiveness, I'm making this one as a follow-up to both discourage people from accusing others of AI use in their art without undeniable proof, and help artists who do face those accusations by providing them with ways to disprove them. And I'll tell you right now that there aren't many anymore, but the ones that are left do work, and they're important to keep in mind now when creating any art, because this problem isn't going away. These accusations are going to keep coming as AI continues to improve, and it's going to become more and more necessary for artists to prepare ways to prove their authorship over their own art in advance as a result. And because some of these methods require you to use them before even making the art in question and can't really be applied afterwards, I think it's even more important to bring attention to them sooner rather than later so that proper preparations can be made in advance and less artists are left without ways to prove their own innocence. But before we get into all of that, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace, my favorite website building and hosting platform and a longtime partner of the channel. I've been using them and working with them for so long that viewers express alarm when a video starts without me gushing about them, and the jokes about me being married to Squarespace have turned into shipping that I can only hope to draw fan art of someday once I figure out how to draw Squarespace as a cute anime girl. In the meantime though, let me tell you why I absolutely would marry them if one could, in fact, marry a platform. Because having created and hosted my personal Duchess Celestia portfolio site there for years, I have the first-hand experience necessary to say with confidence that no matter what kind of website you need to build, they're the place to go to build it, because they have every tool imaginable to make that easy. They have a massive library of professionally designed templates that are perfect for any and every kind of site, all of which are fully customizable so that you can make them your own, add any feature you might need, and even use their extensive extensive visual design tools and effects to fine-tune your site's aesthetic and establish professionalism and brand recognition. You can even turn it into an online store using the Squarespace commerce platform, which allows you to do everything from manage your inventory to take sales and print shipping labels. And with payment methods including the most popular options like Klarna, ACH Direct Debit, Apple Pay, Afterpay, and ClearPay, as well as the option to send individualized invoices to specific clients directly, Squarespace makes it easier than ever for you to sell both goods and services, and for your customers to pay with the option best for them. Whether you're an artist in need of a portfolio, an entrepreneur building an online store, an influencer setting up an interactive blog, or a small business owner making a landing page, Squarespace is the place to do it. Something you can find out yourself by going to squarespace.com to get your very own free trial. And once you've built the perfect site that you're ready to launch, you can get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by going to squarespace.com/DuchessCelestia, linked in the description. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and please go check them out. Now, let's get back to the topic at hand: false AI art accusations. Before I start going over the last remaining ways for artists to reliably disprove them, I first want to reiterate the importance of not making them and putting them in a position to need to in the first place. I can't stress enough that I thoroughly and sincerely understand why there's so much suspicion and skepticism towards any art or image these days from those who don't agree with AI and don't want to support it, but also can't say for sure if they can even identify it. It's harder than ever to tell whether or not an image was AI generated or not, and more often, people are passing off AI generated images as their own art, and in doing so, making all of that suspicion warranted. People have every reason to carefully question and scrutinize the art that they see now to make that judgment for themselves as to whether or not it's really human-made art at all, and I'm not suggesting that that's unreasonable. Like I said, the reason I made that previous video was because I understand that suspicion as someone who experiences it extensively myself, and I have no shortage of sympathy for that motivation. But motivation doesn't justify the increasingly commonplace practice of throwing out unsubstantiated claims that artists you suspect of using AI are, because I sincerely don't believe that to be the right approach in any capacity, nor the productive one. We have a right to scrutinize the art that we see posted online and consider established criteria and indicators that might suggest it's not human-made like the artist claims. We have a right to our suspicions, especially given how often they're proven right, something that's happening more and more frequently now that even actual artists are tracing over AI-generated images and reproducing them as if they were their own without disclosing AI's use. Something that's difficult if not altogether impossible to prove. But that burden of proof is exactly why we should be so much more careful than we are right now about how we handle that suspicion, because there is a burden of proof if we're going to claim our suspicions are based in truth. It's one thing for us to suspect a piece of art may have been made dishonestly with AI, and subsequently choose not to support the artist or buy their work. It's another thing entirely to publicly call them out and accuse them of using AI based on nothing more than those speculative suspicions. Proving that someone used AI to generate an image is exceptionally difficult, and although it's not impossible, the average person doesn't have the tools, knowledge, or experience necessary to do so, and most people throwing out these accusations haven't even bothered to try. Sometimes the fact that the character's hand has wonky fingers is because the image was actually AI generated. Other times, it's because the human artist who drew them is just not the best at hands and made a mistake. To act as if such subjective, circumstantial, quote-unquote proof is sufficient to justify acting on that suspicion by making legitimate accusations is utterly ridiculous. We can ourselves look at those fingers critically to inform our individual opinions on whether or not they're indicative of AI's use, but that's all we're left with, an opinion. And accusing an artist of using AI to generate their work based on nothing more than an opinion is ludicrous. Unless it can be objectively proven beyond reasonable doubt that they did so and you can provide the evidence necessary to back up your claims, there is no instance in which it's appropriate or acceptable to make them anyway. Sometimes you might be right. Even if you don't have the proof to back it up and you do call out an artist based on nothing more than your suspicions, it's entirely possible that those suspicions were well earned and warranted because the artist in question did, in fact, use AI. But other times, and maybe even most times, what's more likely is that you'll be wrong. Even the most innocent of legitimate artistic mistakes these days are being used as evidence that an image is AI generated, when it's nothing more heinous than an accidental flaw. And it's becoming more and more acceptable to adopt the attitude of, well, even if they are just mistakes, I may as well call them out for using AI because it's possible that they did. If they didn't, they'll prove it and there's no harm done. Not only are people acting as if it's easy to disprove AI use accusations when it really isn't, they're acting like they have no obligation to provide any evidence to support those accusations because it should be the responsibility of the artist to prove their innocence rather than of the accuser to prove their guilt. And that, in my opinion, is unacceptable. Regardless of our AI-related fears and how well-earned and reasonable they may be, there is no justification for using those fears to justify completely throwing the concept of innocent until proven guilty out the window. In modern society, the onus has always been, at least in theory if not always practice, on the accuser to prove that the accused committed a crime or misdeed, not the accused to prove that they haven't even when there's no evidence suggesting otherwise in the first place. People don't, or at least shouldn't, go around saying, listen, based on vibes, I feel like maybe you stole that Gatorade you're drinking. It's on you to prove to me that you didn't. Go ahead. There needs to be cause to make an accusation like that, because it's not that random dude's job to prove that he didn't steal the Gatorade when there's no reason to think that he did at all. But the need for cause to support accusations when it comes to AI use in art seems to be dwindling as people become more and more afraid. It takes less and less for people to feel justified accusing others of using AI these days, using nothing more than a wonky finger or a misplaced strand of hair to defend their claim that that means the image was AI generated. In many ways, I think this is due to the massive and rapid improvement of the technology. Whereas indicators of AI use were glaring and obvious just a year or two ago, it's now something that can only be determined by examining the subtlest of details, and even then we can't always tell. So of course people are using smaller and flimsier evidence than ever to claim an artist used AI. It's the only evidence we have left. But if the only evidence we have left is insufficient to prove the claims that we're making, then we need to stop making those claims. We can question people based on that evidence, ask them if they used AI based on the indicators that concern us, but it's beyond unfair and unreasonable to outright claim that they did if we know we can't prove it. I know they might lie and say they didn't when they did, but unless it's in a professional setting where you're asking for proof from an artist that you hired that their work is human-made, that's a risk that I think we need to accept that we have to take now. Because in my opinion, it's better to let one liar using AI to generate images that they claim to be their own art get away with it than accuse 20 innocent human artists of using it when they didn't. Because not only does that contradict the very concept of innocent until proven guilty, it does much more harm to those 20 innocent artists than people seem to think. Artists' reputations are ruined by AI use accusations. If they work in the industry, they could very well be blacklisted from studios that don't allow AI use based on those reputations and rumors alone. And if they take commissions, they're liable to lose business if there's so much as one rumor that they use it, regardless of whether or not it's substantial to any meaningful degree. Friendships within the community get destroyed, trust gets broken, artists turn against each other and attack each other's livelihoods based on nothing more than baseless suspicions, and real people are actively and regularly hurt by how commonplace these accusations are becoming. We are valid to be suspicious of all art these days, but it is unacceptable to use those suspicions to justify making legitimately harmful and career-ending accusations towards the artists who make it. And as I said before, many argue that there's no harm done if the artists in question simply prove that they didn't use AI. But not only are they not obligated to provide proof of their innocence if no proof of their guilt has been presented first, providing proof in the first place is more difficult by the day. It used to be that you could just show your sketches, works in progress, line art, and so on to prove that you drew your art. But AI can generate sketches and works in progress of existing AI-generated images now to fool people into thinking it's human-made. Some even with transparent backgrounds to suggest that it's a real line art file. Once that developed, we turned to providing time-lapses to prove that we drew it. But AI can generate time-lapses now too. I was gonna do a video on it, but I decided it might do more harm than good to discuss how it works because it might just inform not so well-intentioned viewers on how to exploit it. So I won't get into too much detail here for the same reason. But what's relevant is that it can take an AI-generated image and reverse engineer a time-lapse of the work's creation informed by real artists' processes, starting with the sketch and generating the entire development from lining to rendering. It's flawed, and at least right now, people with any degree of art experience and familiarity can recognize these AI-generated time-lapses. They don't make logical sense, things are done out of order, multiple areas are worked on simultaneously in a way that would be impossible, huge additions like entire backgrounds appear all at once and then transform without reason or explanation as the time-lapse continues. And one generated image of Superman even started with a sketch of some random anime dude with a goatee because the AI isn't capable of understanding that Superman isn't some random dude with a goatee, and it wouldn't make sense for the base sketch to have him be one. But non-artists may not recognize these flaws, and in time, the developers may improve so much on the code responsible that they'll appear less often and less reliably. Moreover, real artists can be responsible for a lot of those red flags too. Not everyone follows a linear process of sketch to line art to color, and plenty of artists work on different areas randomly and according to no apparent order or direction based on how their creative process and attention span work. So claiming that a time-lapse is AI-generated just because AI-generated time-lapses often have nonsensical creative processes is hardly reliable. People also use brushes, stamps, and photos to add large background elements all at once in a way that might resemble how AI-generated time-lapses create them out of nothing. We can't prove that any of the indicators of AI-generated time-lapses actually do mean AI was used, because many could also be explained by artist error or unconventional creative processes. So we're now in a position where even if time-lapses can't be used as evidence that AI was used to create an image, they also can no longer really be used as evidence that it wasn't. Time-lapses, sketches, works in progress, line art, all of those methods of proving that your art is your own are already outdated and ineffective, something that happened alarmingly quickly. So when people say there's no harm done if I accuse an innocent artist of using AI because they can just prove that they didn't, that's just objectively not true. Most artists who don't use software like Procreate that automatically records a time-lapse of any piece they work on don't actively record time-lapses of all of their work. So even if time-lapses were still reliable evidence of human authorship, most artists don't have time-lapses of all of the art they make, if any at all. Best case scenario, they do, and that's still no longer enough to satisfy accusers. users, nor is providing their sketches or works in progress. The only unilaterally reliable method we have left to disprove false AI use allegations requires us to implement it before even making a piece. So for many, they're left with work that they can't prove they didn't use AI to generate because they didn't know how to implement those measures first. It's not easy to disprove false claims anymore, and there is harm done if they're made anyway against artists with no means by which to argue against them. And while I'm passionately against this widely accepted belief that it's their responsibility to somehow do so anyway because all AI art accusations are valid without proof, the bottom line is that whether I think it should be that way or not, it's come to a point where I feel like it is regardless. I don't believe artists should be obligated to provide proof that they made their art themselves without AI just because some asshole online said they did use it despite providing no evidence to support that claim. I don't believe artists should need to take extensive preemptive measures to prepare and collect evidence proving that they did make every single piece of their own art, just because the practice of making baseless AI use accusations is so acceptable that it's the standard to be expected now. I don't believe artists are guilty of using AI until they prove themselves innocent, and I don't believe that's how it should be. But in an age of unprecedented and admittedly warranted fear and uncertainty, whether we like it or not, that seems to be how it is. That's not to say we can do nothing about it. I'm making this video and talking at such length about this section because I want to change that that's how it is, and encourage people not to adopt such a toxic, harmful, and unfair view on this. And I have no intention of giving up on that, nor should you if you agree. But it would be irresponsible to acknowledge that regardless of my efforts and those of many others, that is still how things are right now, even if we hope to change them in the future. And we need to adapt and prepare for that if we want to keep ourselves and our reputations safe. That in mind, let's discuss the last remaining methods of disproving false accusations of AI image generation, because until things do change, it's become fairly undeniably necessary at this point for us to be able to, even if it means taking precautions that we shouldn't be obligated to. As I said earlier, the most foolproof method of proving that you created your own art is one that needs to be implemented before a piece is even made and can't be used to prove the authenticity of existing art, which is why it's so important for artists to know to do so in advance moving forward if it's the one that they want to use. And it's screen recording. For most, at least right now, time-lapses are still mostly considered to be sufficient evidence if viewed by a discerning eye. Experienced artists can almost always tell whether a time-lapse is human-made or AI-generated based on the process displayed by it. But not only is that liable to change as the technology improves, it's also still subjective as there's room for error in judging what actions taken in the time-lapse are indicative of AI and what aren't. If you use a program that records them automatically, it's absolutely a good idea to turn that feature on just to be safe. And if you don't, it might be worth downloading and using a third-party program to record them. Because regardless of the debatability of their validity as proof, they at least provide value by supporting your defense. Screen recording, however, is something that AI has not, to my knowledge, been able to replicate yet. Capturing the entire screen of whatever tool you're drawing on for the entirety of the time you spend drawing it is arguably the most irrefutable way to prove that you drew it, since every brushstroke is documented in real time and every step in the process is recorded for anyone suspicious of its authenticity to see. But while it may be widely regarded as the best possible way to disprove false AI use accusations and prove human authorship of a piece of art, it's also the most burdensome. People on lower-end devices with less memory may not be able to record their screens at all, without significant lag or decrease in computer performance. And even if they don't, the file sizes of the videos they record will be enough on their own to stress their systems and their storage. Drawing takes a long time, and recording the entire process often means storing hours upon hours of footage that will quickly take up the vast majority of your storage. And while storing those files on an external hard drive or an online cloud service like iCloud or Google Drive might help, even those will eventually fill up if you record every second you spend drawing anything. Yes, you can edit those videos and speed them up so that they're smaller and faster and more organized, but that takes a lot of time and effort that many artists are already far too short on. There's also the risk of user error, which alongside massive file size was actually the main reason that I switched from screen recordings to time-lapses myself. I always used to start working on a piece and realize halfway through that I had forgotten to start recording, and subsequently lost all footage of any of the work I'd just done. I may be a dumbass, but I can't be the only one who's done this. And these days, even a bit of missing footage is enough to draw AI-related suspicion, so that's an increasingly large risk to take. That's another reason that even if you do decide to use screen recordings to capture proof of creation for every piece, it's a good idea to also have time-lapses being recorded alongside that, so that if you do forget at the beginning of any particular drawing session, that software is still recording each action taken on the canvas and can display them in video format, even if not to the degree of accuracy or detail that a screen recording would. Ultimately, while I can say confidently that at least for now, screen recordings are the best way to protect yourself against possible allegations of AI use, I also can't necessarily recommend them as the most feasible way based on all of the hurdles I've already mentioned. If you want to and have the means to record the entire process of each piece's creation and you have the space to store them all, hell yeah, do it. You'll be prepared to whip out each one to shove in the faces of internet assholes at the slightest provocation. But if you don't, that's more than fair, and you shouldn't feel obligated to as if it's your only option. Because it's not. There's There's also the second remaining way to prove that you didn't use AI in your art, and that's by keeping your PSDs. Well, not just PSDs. .sci files, .clip files, .procreate files, really any type of file that preserves all of the layers that you used in each piece, rather than just simply a flat image like a PNG or JPEG. While AI may be able to generate sketches, line art, and works in progress, it can't as of yet generate authentic layers like human artists usually create. Most digital artists use layers to separate individual aspects of their art, keeping their sketch on one that they can toggle visibility for when they want to trace it to make clean line art, their line art on one so that they can add color without affecting it, their shading on another so it doesn't directly affect the flat color beneath it, and so on. Layer modes are often another staple as a result, providing artists with a multitude of different settings that change the way that color on one layer interacts with the layer below it. While every artist is different when it comes to how they use layers and how many they use, the bottom line is that most at least have a few of them that are formatted and preserved in a way that AI can't currently replicate. Here's an example of the ridiculous number of layers and layer modes on one of my recent pieces to illustrate exactly how difficult it would be for AI to generate even vaguely similarly or convincingly accurate iterations. Because these layers are completely preserved and not flattened in PSDs and similar file types though, they're often quite large. Not as large as videos of course, but much larger than the flattened PNGs that artists usually save of their finished work. As a result, artists have been known to delete them once each piece of art is finished, as they no longer have a need for those layers once they're satisfied with the final flattened product and don't have the space to spare for a file that's only really kept with the intention of accommodating revisions that they no longer intend to make. But because these files are now one of the only things that AI can't produce, they're now one of the only things we can use to prove that we didn't use it to make our art. So while it was once commonplace to delete them once they were no longer needed, it's become necessary for that to change. While we shouldn't be obligated to keep all of our full layer files for each piece just to prove human authorship of our work, we're at a point where we are, whether we like it or not, and deleting them now runs the risk of leaving you unable to disprove false allegations if you face them. Storing your full-size PSDs of each piece of art that you make either online or externally is now a recommendation that I make for every artist, whether they're currently facing those allegations or not, because they've quickly become one of the only reliable options to prove that our work is our own that we have left. I'm emphasizing the increased importance of layer files not just so artists know not to delete them, but also because their necessity may impact their creative process. A lot of artists, myself included, flatten or merge a lot of layers in our files so that they can be edited as one big thing rather than a bunch of small individual things. Whether it's for convenience, organization, or to enable them to use tools that only work on the layer directly below them, and not every layer below them, many digital artists merge layers into each other when it's no longer necessary to keep them separate throughout the duration of their creative process. We also often delete layers that we don't need anymore, like sketches, scrapped color corrections or effects, references, and so on, as most programs do have a layer limit, and it's also just hectic, organizationally speaking, to have and keep track of a lot of them, and anything that we don't need to keep usually ends up being deleted to avoid both problems. And this now presents a new problem. If we merge too many of them or flatten them entirely, those PSDs may no longer contain the necessary layers to prove that we didn't use AI. And while we shouldn't need to change our creative process just to avoid that, once again, we're at a point where I believe that we do need to regardless. I'm not saying that you can't merge layers or flatten your files, but just as it's more important than ever to keep all of your PSDs, I believe it's equally important to keep duplicate copies of them that contain all of your unmerged layers before they're flattened, or at least most of the significant ones. Even if you flatten them on your main file and then add more revisions and effects to that flat image on new layers, you'll still have a version without those new revisions with the old layers preserved, which is enough to disprove AI use accusations. Layers are now more important than ever, and keeping a file that preserves them to the fullest extent possible is something that I think every artist should be doing by default, just in case. You may not have them for your older work anymore, but making sure you do for all of the work that you make from now on is one of the few remaining ways to keep yourself safe from baseless allegations these days. Now, those are the only remaining reliable ways that I know of for artists to irrefutably disprove claims of AI use in their art, although that may change for the better or for the worse in time. But there is another very promising alternative currently in development: Artistry's human certification. Artistry is a platform that I've used and worked with extensively that allows artists to create and host art commission forms, communicate with clients, process commission payments, and deliver finished commissions to those clients all in one place. And it's always my first recommendation for any artist accepting them. But while they have sponsored me before, they did not sponsor this video, and I'm not actually here to talk about that. What I'm here to talk about is that they recently announced that they're also working on something new, a system that analyzes the files of any submitted art to assess whether it was human-made or AI generated. While the details aren't public, the site explains that they use a multitude of methods to do so. They assess the layers, as I just explained, but they go beyond that. They also examine the image's metadata, revision history, and C2PA content credentials to verify in every possible way that the art was, in fact, created by a human. This human certification may be a huge step in the right direction for the art industry as a whole, as it would allow studios and companies to actually enforce anti-AI policies for their art teams and move towards a world where we can actually reliably check without without painfully effort and time-intensive methods whether art is human-made or not. But not only could it change the trajectory of the entire art industry's approach towards AI, it could do wonders for individual artists facing accusations of AI use. Once it's completed and available for public use, Artistry's human certification will ostensibly allow any artist to submit their work for review and have proof that it's theirs without needing to worry about anything else I've discussed so far, which would be a sincerely incredible tool for the community that could finally quash this growing trend of unsubstantiated, baseless AI use accusations being thrown at every artist online. For now, though, it is still in development, and while companies, agencies, and studios are currently able to sign up to request a demo of the tool, it is not available publicly or for individual artists. It's also worth mentioning that as it's not free to analyze the C2PA content credentials of an image and a real human being has to be paid to analyze layered files, it probably won't be a free service. It's likely that when human certification is made publicly available, it will cost you something to use it. I don't know how much, I really don't even know where to begin speculating, but I do think it's important to keep in mind. Regardless, while it's not here yet, it's promising and I am so excited about it, and as soon as it does go public, I will let you guys know right away with a dedicated video just about it and how it works. In the meantime though, that's really all we're left with. An increasingly suspicious and uncertain community riddled with fear that we'll be unable to tell the difference between real art and AI-generated images, coping with that fear by erring on the side of caution, at least in their eyes, and accusing any artist they even distantly suspect of having used AI of having objectively done so without proof. And those artists are expected to prove their innocence while accusers don't need to prove the artist's guilt. A backwards and unfair system that leaves artists with stressful obligations to collect proof that they shouldn't need to provide, and very few options left with which to do so. But there are still options, and there is still hope that things can change for the better, so long as we stick it out and commit to helping make that change ourselves. In the meantime, I hope this video at least helped a few of you prepare for the harsh reality of AI art accusations as they currently are, so that if you ever face them, you can disprove them before they have the chance to ruin your reputation or lose you business, friends, or even entire careers. I also hope it helped some of you realize the harm that can be done by throwing those accusations around baselessly and without due diligence, or fulfilling the burden of proof, because it can be life-changingly damaging to the artists on the receiving end who, more often than not, just made honest human mistakes that are being interpreted in bad faith. Bad faith that's understandably motivated by fear, but bad faith nonetheless. Things are scary right now, but there are ways to handle them that hurt everyone involved less, both accuser and accused. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Zelda Deverak 42, Haruki Saluzzo, Ginka James, CB Lo Thing, Art of Amethyst Fable, Extinction Animation, and Andy the Hedgehog, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Alengshi, Kim Yen, Crazy Asar, Gentong, Grace Nick Xavier, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Celine Merriman, Ash, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Allura, Greg Noble, Decagon, Jenny Chan, Cat Bus, Mac, Lucy Majiki, Selena Beebe, Prade, Totally Shogun, Insomniac Sleep Schedule, Wing Tang Wong, and Marie Greer, and I'll see you in the next one.